ASMR. I'm like, which essential oil do I want today? I'm gonna put some lavender oil on. Settle in. I hope you guys are feeling good, feeling great. Hope you had a great day today. I hope you wrote down something in your journal for your journey. And yeah. Okay, welcome back to A Girl with a Joint, the podcast that takes its name literal. Except this is another episode where that is not the case. I don't know how many times I'll say that. You will actively see me if I am. Until that happens, that's just that on that. I'm just gonna continue introing the podcast as it was intended to be introed. Hey everyone, welcome back to A Girl with a Joint. This is my third episode, and on today's episode we'll be discussing childhood wounding and how that directly correlates to our adult lives. I'm really excited for this episode. This has been something that I've been working on within myself for a few years, and I'm still young, so I'm sure, there's more to discover and dissect as life continues for me. But as of now, I'm just kind of gonna go based off of the things that I've learned and have, experienced up until this point. So I want to thank everybody for supporting my last few episodes, for giving me really nice feedback, telling me your opinions. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. This is something that is actively assisting me also within my childhood wounding. So this episode is very near and dear to my heart because, I don't know, I feel like I might have stated it in a few moments here and there within the previous episodes, but within my childhood experience specifically, I didn't feel like I had a place to vocalize my voice and actively assert my voice in places. I feel like that kind of often is the case for some children, just because adults don't respect children's opinions because they think they are more intelligent, or because they've lived a longer life that they know what they're doing. I'm here to let everybody know I have debunked that case, okay? Within my life, I have definitely debunked that misconception between adults and children. I said this before, but when I came into the world, I feel like I came into the world knowing myself and knowing exactly what I wanted for myself, and through my life experience, I have kind of had to, I don't want to say fight, but I've kind of had to stick up for me being content in self to other people, and me trying to justify myself to others. That's kind of been my life experience, is constantly having people challenge me, and it feels very personal because within my own home life experience that was also the case. And now at the age I am, I can wholeheartedly say that I have been in the know for a very long time. I've been very content with self for a very long time. It's just been a matter of my actions and surroundings reflecting the way that I felt. Yeah. So I kind of wanted to say this statement that no matter how small or large the events that you face within your childhood seem to you, they have tremendous reflections on your adult life. And it could be from something so simple happening to you one time in your life that can literally alter your reality if you allow it to, and if you have not accepted the fact that that is a specific thing that happened to you as a child and you can relate it to your adult life. So let me go back and say that one more time in case it came off very confusing. No matter how small or large the event that occurred to you in your childhood, the effects of that event, no matter the magnitude, can translate to your adult life and directly affect how you are and how you are perceived in society and how your character speaks for itself. I have a list of things and I will go into each piece, but again, I speak from a very personable stance a lot of the times, so I'm using also myself as a tool to give you perspective. From seeing toxic relationships, from arguments, fighting, very toxic disagreements amongst adults being normalized in your household, from the lack of communication from the people within your family or household, not having a safe space emotionally to present yourself as a child, being forced to be around people or be in environments that made you feel uncomfortable, for a lot of Black people and people of color, being beaten or receiving weird tactics of punishment for your actions, having a helicopter parent or constantly being micromanaged as a child directly affects your adult life. Having absentee parents directly affects your adult life. Those are just a few of the things. So within these events, I really want you to utilize this podcast specifically to take a deep dive into yourself and your own structure in the world and what you faced. Because all of the things that happen to you, and it's okay to speak about them. And even if you're just speaking about it to yourself and you do seem to get emotional on a situation, that's okay. And these are things that you need to speak about, because when you disregard the fact that trauma occurred to you, you tend to be an oblivious adult later on. You tend to just remain in the 3D realm of capitalism and succumb to the society that was built for you to fail in and for you to not receive and reach emotional fulfillment. Okay, so I'm a very open person. I know people perceive the term trauma dumping is a thing. I have experienced trauma dumping and trauma bonding with other people, and it's not a healthy experience. But what I can say is, as a person who I would consider myself a pretty vulnerable person, I have no problem owning my truth and the things that have happened to me, because I've addressed them with the people that directly affected me. So if that weren't the case, I probably wouldn't feel as comfortable as I do telling people about the things that have happened to me in my life, because the reality of the situation is a lot of these things have happened to a lot of other children, and just based on conversations with my peers, my other family members, miscellaneous strangers on the internet, etc., but we have all experienced some format of trauma based on the fact that the people who raised us are trauma filled and had children with these traumas still within themselves that they have not resolved. So even being raised by a parent who is a traumatized child still, that is then passed on to you, and even how they raise you, which I think is very important to discuss, because a lot of us do come from homes of immigrants, and they have this disconnect between relating their childhood trauma for some reason to being an American. I don't know what that is necessarily, but I've had a lot of situations where people who are from these different countries who come to America and succumb to whatever they believe the American dream to be have this perception of the generations or the people within their lives that do want to evolve emotionally and spiritually, because I feel like evolving emotionally is a practice of evolving spiritually. They have this perception that people like that are trying or believe or think it's a privilege to do so. And I'm here to tell you, it is not a privilege to want to be emotionally healed and evolved. This is not an American facade that is placed on a generation for fucking shits and giggles, which a lot of adults and the older generations tend to try to make others feel. I've seen it my entire life. I hear it in conversations regularly. I see it presented on social media, with cross generations being on the same platforms. There is a large disconnect, and I think the disconnect is believing that addressing the things that have happened to you is a privilege because they never got to address theirs. But the only reason why they didn't address theirs is because they had children before they did. And I think that's like a main factor for me why I've been in like a disdain of having children for my entire life. Like, people my entire, like, since you were a kid, for whatever reason, being a woman in this lifetime, people will ask you about whether or not you want to be a mom or have a child when you are literally a child. And I hated those conversations, and I hated hearing kids my age talk about how much they wanted to be a mom and a parent, because I'm like, you're a fucking kid. Like, half of your parents are literally children trapped in adults' bodies. Let's talk about that first. Okay, like, let's backtrack and like heal our generation and society before we dive into continuing to breed more traumatized people. Because the thing is, on top of those things of just unresolved childhood trauma and having a child with unresolved childhood trauma, you have to take into account, especially as a Black person, being born on this land, automatically you are born with generational trauma because of slavery. Slavery took place on this land, therefore enables us to be in a traumatized society that has never represented our truth. Okay, so in that instance, it's very difficult to not, especially as a Black person, not have trauma automatically that you never asked for. Even in a environment where you are dealing with healed parents, the system itself that was created to neglect Black people is still the structure in which you live in. Therefore, it's very difficult to think of yourself as a healed person in a society that automatically ingrains you in being traumatized. That's something that is an entirely different conversation. I'm just trying to, because it goes very deeply, but trying to stay on track with just childhood wounding and trauma existing, and it exists amongst all ethnicities, but I'm speaking specifically from the Black Caribbean community, because those are the majority of my peers and mutuals and family members that I've had conversations with. So, okay, so let's just dive into absentee parents, because as well as being in the Black community, it is very normalized for there to not be a two-party household. It's not a requirement to obviously have a two-parent functioning household for whatever reason, but I believe the main reason does stem from slavery and Black people being stripped from their families regularly for years, and then just being born into this infrastructure again that normalizes the trauma that they caused, is to normalize in a patriarchal society that black men period, are just not as responsible for the children that they tend to partake in having. But just as much as you can have an absentee father, which is the more normalized standard in our patriarchal society, you can have an absentee mother. You can have absentee, both parents can be absentee in this situation. And I think it's important to address that, regardless if you even have parents regardless if you have two parents in your household, you can still be raised by absentee parents if they do not have the emotional maturity level to relate to you and to bear a nurturing space for you to grow. Which is kind of relates to what I said, as sometimes we are raised by wounded children. And when you're raised by a wounded child who has never been given space to have the kind of conversations that even their child is trying to present in front of them, it is very difficult space to navigate nonetheless, especially in a household where the conversation is adults are adults and children need to stay in a child's place. If you are growing up in that infrastructure of a home, there isn't much space for you to address the situation at hand, which is, no matter the age group, sometimes in these circumstances, the child can be more mature than the parent. And the child can have more emotional cognizance, I don't know what that word is, but you know what I'm trying to say, than the parent. And when you're dealing in that space, it makes your life infrastructure a debate. And you are constantly trying to debate the fact that you have a certain level of emotional intelligence that is just not protected, nurtured, or cared for in your home environment. Yeah. So with absentee parents, whether that's emotionally absent or physically absent, as being raised by one parent in a one parent household where I feel like I was raised in a absentee space. None of the people in my direct home had the opportunity to resolve their childhood traumas and woundings prior to having children. None of them. Not even the generation that raised the people my family was raised by. Like, not my family, my generation was raised by in my household. Now that I'm an adult and I've been able to have the conversations that I've needed to have with certain people, it was very evident to me that I was in an infrastructure that was enabling a child raising a child. And that's why I have very specific opinions on people having children when I believe that they are not ready. I've worked alongside kids in a nonprofit. And when I worked with children, I was able to really let go of my disdain for the ideology of having children, but I began more so to just want to protect the children that are here. There's a lot of children that are produced in our society, that are produced in spaces that, I'm going to say something, but do not deserve children. It's very normalized to have, it's very normalized to have children as a means of your relationship versus wanting to nurture and grow a child. A lot of people are having children as a means of an aesthetic because of social media and trying to aspire for the pictures, the photo opportunities, just baby fever, quote unquote. Hate that shit. There's a lot of people who are having children for financial gain. There are people who have children to trap people, vice versa, male and female. If you have conversations with the women around you, ask them how many men have told them they are trying to get them pregnant. Okay? This is not just a ideology of women wanting and trying to trap men for financial reasons or whatever, relationship reasons, whatever the case is. It's a two-way street, which is just toxic and unhealthy and ugly. I'm sorry. I hate it. There's a lot of people having children who still have the emotional growth of a child because they have not healed their inner child and have not addressed the traumatizing things that have occurred to them throughout their childhood, and they have not had the conversations they needed to have with their parents about the things that have happened. Therefore, they want to have children as a means of trying to fight against, that construct. But then the reality is they tend to just replicate the same process of the parent that they had, especially like when you're always trying to not be like someone. For instance, if you have a disdain toward one of your parental figures and you're trying to do everything in your power to not be like them and not do things like them, you typically tend to embody characteristics of those people, whether you are conscious about it or not. And I think having that as the core reason why you choose to have a child is typically when you end up in this foggy place of raising a child exactly like how you were raised subconsciously, because you're not in your consciousness while you're actively raising children. Yeah. Just off the top of my head. But absentee parents, so there's always the, conversation of like daddy issues and mommy issues, but I just think people have issues, period. I think if you have time today, sometime this week, just sit down and write out on a piece of paper the things that happened to you as a child. Whether it happened from a school situation with like friends, or if it's happening amongst your mother or your father or your family members, or the relationships you experience as a kid. Write them all out in front of you so you can directly hold the parties responsible for putting you in a certain situation. And I feel like when you do that act, you would be able to specifically correlate how maybe your father being verbally abusive to your mother could relate to the fact that you tend to date men now in your adult life that don't respect you as highly as you would want to be respected. Or you tend to attract specific kinds of men that emulate your father's archetype, which is exactly what you did not want to do. Or another example could be, like, what else? Or you could have the instance of your parents being in a very socialite relationship. And I say that in the sense, like, when you go out as a unit together, it's a very pleasant experience and everyone's on their best performance. But behind closed doors, in intimate settings, in your home, it is a toxic environment, whether there's verbal abuse, whether there's physical abuse, whether someone is disrespecting another person, vice versa. That would then, I feel like, train you to learn how to put on a presentation and perform for others in your adult life. You are now going out into the world making sure all your T's are crossed and your I's are dot, but your home life, your core self, you have not addressed the core issues. You have not looked in the mirror, for instance. Michael Jackson, Man in the Mirror. We'll listen to it. But these are like just a few things. Like there's honestly lists and lists and lists of things, but I'm trying to also get through the other things I want to talk about. But overall, having absentee parents can translate to it translates directly to you being absentee in your adult life, whether you are absent in your emotional needs, whether you're absent in your physical needs, whether literally whether you're absent in a relationship. As soon as you get into a relationship, you disassociate. Like, absentee parents will translate to you being absent in other spaces in your adult life. Being micromanaged as a child, or having a helicopter parent. So like this would be like the difference. You have an absentee parent who like really doesn't focus too much on your specific needs or isn't there for you. You don't feel protected by these people, then to having someone who's trying to hyper protect you, but in that instance it's really control. It's a power thing. It's a power struggle. Maybe more than likely something happened to your parent who is like this if they're constantly trying to triple, quadruple check and manage everything that you're doing, and they don't allow you to be an individual outside of them. But also take into consideration all these things can interlap and intersect and exist amongst one another. You can have an absentee parent who is absent for years out of your life and then come into your life and then try to micromanage what you're doing. And it doesn't relate, it doesn't connect, but again, the title is always so quote unquote, like this is your family, or this is your dad, or this is your mother. So especially in a cultural background, you're made to believe that you need to respect whether the person is in and out and being an absentee parent or not, that when they come back you have to accept it, which is, here's your cue, here is your sign. You do not need to do anything you do not want to do. You do not need to speak to anyone you do not want to speak to. You do not need to be made to feel uncomfortable. Okay? Give me 1 second. Someone is calling me, and I will be back on helicopter micromanaging parents. Hey guys. So, I look different than the last time I was filming. If you're watching this on YouTube, and the only reason that is because last video I was like, oh, someone's calling me. Then I went from someone calling me to me watching like the astrologer that I follows live. And then once I finished watching the astrologers live, my grandma hit me up, so I went to go hang out with her, and I ended up spending a couple days with her. So now we're a few days later, but I'm continuing where I left off. I was about to get into being micromanaged or having helicopter parents as, that's where I was. Alright, let's get started. So, in the last half, I left off on being micromanaged as a child / having helicopter parents. I think when you are micromanaged by your parent, you don't properly know how to form decisions for yourself, or in your adult life, you begin to like second guess and question the decisions you make for yourself, because as a child you are constantly told what to do, or what was acceptable, or what was allowed, or everything kind of in that same ballpark. So I think it can be quite difficult when you are an adult and you finally get to have freedom for yourself in that sense, and it's not received well, either you feel like by others or you feel like by yourself. Like there's a constant second guessing of your power and what's going on. Okay. Yeah, so being micromanaged as a child, slash having a helicopter parent, I believe would lead you to experiencing a lack of confidence. You tend to second guess consistently yourself, your own decisions, the decisions and the autonomy of your own body. And I feel like in those cases, you tend to grow into an adult that has difficulty standing in their decisions and being confident about the choices they make for themselves, because that right was kind of taken away from you as a child. I believe also it leads to a lot of quote unquote devious children. Normally, the children that come from very, very strict homes go to school or have friends or get into relationships with just someone completely opposing their parents' guideline that they kind of created and how they were raised. It leads to children being mischievous and trying to rebel in all ways possible and trying to just get so far away from the rules that they have in their household that they're willing to kind of do anything at school and be in any situation and have any kind of friend and talk to the most quote unquote bad boy, or bad girl, or stuff, all of those natures, just to try to find balance. I think they're searching for balance within themselves and trying to feel like they have control over their own lives, when parents tend to go overboard as far as trying to, they believe, I think, keep their child safe. But sometimes it goes beyond just keeping your child safe. It's more along the lines of wanting your child to either be exactly like you or completely different from you. You are trying to control the image and narrative of someone else's story because you believe that because you're an adult and you took part in this person being on this earth, that you can create decisions for them. Overall, absentee parents, hyperactive. I don't want to say hyperactive because a hyperactive parent can be a good thing, but from absentee parents to micromanaging, helicopter, super strict parents, both outcomes lead to something, in your adult life. So take that as you do. And this one is a nice little juicy one. So it's very strange. Again, within the US, I feel like I constantly have to talk about slavery because to me everything does go back to slavery and just our history and what we are perceived to believe is going on I have like mosquito bite. What is going on amongst, let me backtrack. Yeah, so this next topic that I have is a little touchy because it occurs heavily within Black, Caribbean, Indigenous households. Beating your children / I put having oddly strict punishments for a child. I completely 100% believe that adults who got beaten as children and had terrible punishments then become parents who do the same, and they kind of justify it in their heads as, well, my parent did this to me, and because they're not healed and don't have the will to address the issues that occurred within their own childhood, they then reciprocate the same energy, so to speak. So overall, I just think hitting children for obscure reasons, and just hitting children, period. Obviously, there's various kinds of kids in the world that come here, but more than likely within Black, Caribbean, people of color, indigenous, cultured backgrounds, they have obscure punishments and have this fascination, I feel like, with hitting their kids and thinking that will change things. I can speak for myself, coming from a Haitian household. I don't know about you guys, but I had to ingenue. So when you have to ingenue, it's basically kneeling. You basically have to kneel on your knees and face a wall, a corner, or whatever. But take that into account. You're doing this on your bare knees for hours plus. Okay? You are kneeling on your knees for hours, staring at a wall for, it could be something as mundane as getting like a fucking C, or not finishing your homework and your teacher being like, your teacher's like, I'm gonna call your parent, shit like that. And a lot of white teachers, I think, do that purposely to Black children to see if when the child comes back to school the next day, they have a different demeanor. That's a whole nother fucking topic, okay? Because my 4th grade teacher is a bitch. And she sent me to the fucking police officer on school campus, okay? It was for a valid reason, but she was a bitch regardless. Anyway, let's not talk about her. All right, this is not my story. Well, it is my story, but that wasn't necessary. Anyways, so yeah, I don't know what it is, but for me personally, because of my experience with my punishments as a child, I was not a bad child. I really didn't do too many like outrageous things. My I don't even know what you call it, but me just being a kid resulted sometimes, and me making, I guess you could say, a poor decision as a kid resulted in me receiving these obscure, weird punishments. And I just think it's inhumane. Like, I don't know how more else to explain it. And like, sometimes within Black and Caribbean households, your parents will give people who are not your parents, random fucking adults who have no power over you and your body, the privilege to also punish you, or the privilege to also hit you, and for whatever reason have no problem in seeing the issue with that. This is just, I just think being beaten as a child and being punished outrageously for mundane things that kids just experience and do, will later on relate to people not knowing how to properly address situations, being scared to confront people with truth because you have like fucking PTSD from what the response might be. You could also lead into abusive, either emotionally or physically abusive relationships later on in your life, and try to normalize that to yourself. I feel like you can have just poor communication skills because you're just constantly moving through life out of fear of punishment for things that people have no ability to do over you. And I'm gonna leave it at that, okay? something that I also experienced as a child, I would say, is being forced to be around people or be in environments that you weren't comfortable in. I think a lot of the times parents like to put on shows for other parents, other family members. People just like acting in this capitalistic, entertainment filled society. And I think that comes from people, again, not knowing how to properly communicate with one another and not having healthy spaces and safe spaces to build trust in. So when I say being forced to be around people, for instance, like I know within my own story and within some of my peers and family members that have shared with me, especially in, again, Black, Caribbean, indigenous cultured households, there is like a lingering story of like a weird fucking uncle, or a person in the family who does these really dangerous acts to children who still gets invited to family events. And sometimes that doesn't come out until everyone's like in adult years later on in their life. But I always do know that there's a lingering story, rumor, or whatever. But before the child even knows, more than likely, a kid will tell you up front, because kids are really receptive to energy. When they are telling you that they do not like someone or they think something suspicious about someone, and an adult, the person who is supposed to protect them, someone who is supposed to give them and allow them to be in safe spaces where they feel comfortable being a child in, it's not reciprocated. Like, children will explain or tell you their discomfort or tell you they don't want to go somewhere, and instead of really taking time, I feel like, to have a conversation with said child, a lot of the times adults, parents, guardians, whomever, will not necessarily care and will use the setting. Like, let's say it's a fucking holiday and the weird uncle is invited and the kid doesn't like going to the house, period. Like, anyways, maybe it's because the bad energy in the house, maybe it's because they see ghosts, maybe because they don't fucking like their cousins, whatever the case is. I feel like kids have reasons, and a lot of the times they're just not listened to and given a space to be heard. And they end up being put in this dangerous environment where that fucking person in the house will make them feel uncomfortable. They will see the lingering eyes. You will get caught up in a fucking hallway trying to go into the restroom, and like, those are moments where pivotal things happen to kids. It literally takes no more than fucking 5 seconds for something dangerous to happen to a child that makes them feel very uncomfortable and unsafe. And I feel like every time adults inconvenience children to convenience themselves, they are establishing a unhealthy space for a child who later becomes an adult to not know how to set boundaries, or they overly set boundaries and don't want to be around anyone, and they become very antisocial. Whether it's one or the other, it comes from spaces and times like that where you consistently vocalize how someone doesn't make you feel good or feel safe or feel, you don't feel like you could be yourself in a certain space, and you are forced to be put into these spaces or that home or that environment or with that person, and something later on, God forbid, possibly for a lot of people it has happened, something dangerous has happened and it's not addressed, and now the child starts acting differently for the rest of their childhood years, and you as a parent didn't do your job in that moment to address the situation at the first hand. You just continued to convenience yourself for the sake of fucking eating like Thanksgiving dinner, or for the sake of having somewhere to drop off your kid so you can go do who knows what, or for the sake of just continuing to be ignorant. I can speak for myself, because this has happened to me multiple times, where I've just been put in environments that I just did not feel comfortable in, or I felt like there was a person in, like, even if it was a safe environment, there would be a person that would intrude that safe environment, and the family knew about it, and the family just didn't speak about it, and it just continued on. And God forbid something happened to someone else in that space, and now everyone's suffering the repercussions of that one moment, or those many years of where no one spoke about anything, because these people are not healed enough to create spaces to have conversations. They don't want to address the traumas of what happened to them, because maybe even that's a person who affected your parent, like your parent, your uncle, your whatever, like it's just so close to home. Or it's a friend, like a parent's friend group, or there's just so many places and people and spaces that I just feel like kids are put in that are dangerous, and sometimes more than likely they will try to signal something, and it's just a matter of if they're heard or not, and that will later on develop an adult who doesn't feel heard or doesn't feel seen in spaces, or constantly has anxiety when going into parties. And I genuinely don't feel like anxiety is a thing. I feel like an anxiety is a response of your subconscious relating certain actions in your everyday life to traumas, or relating certain actions in your life to just media consumption of toxicity. Like anxiety, I genuinely think is not a real physical thing that people can inhibit and be born with. I don't think people are born with a lot of quote unquote mental illnesses. I made a video about this on my TikTok, but I just don't think that some of these ailments that our society is trying to normalize within our communities and spaces actually exist, but they later on exist because multiple people are self-diagnosing themselves with these things, or multiple people are assimilating themselves to these things because they just have a lot of unresolved trauma and difficulties that have not ever been addressed in their adult years. And I think it's like a generational thing where amongst, I don't know what generation that is before millennials. I'm just going to call them boomers. But boomers versus like millennials, and Gen Z, I guess. I think that's like the three that are coexisting, I guess, as of right now. But within those spaces, a lot of boomers, or people who are raised by boomers, are essentially trying to water down the fact that these traumas exist and have not been resolved and are consistent in their lives daily, and they show up in their daily behaviors, which is why they act the way they act. And a lot of our parents are, I would say, those collective group of people who are raised by boomers, if not are boomers, and they're in this in-between space of not knowing how to speak up for themselves because they are entrapped children. You are being raised by kids who are traumatized, who don't have a voice to speak up for themselves because they never had a safe space to begin with. Next. So I'm kind of wrapping these into one, I would say. I said no communications of feelings within your childhood and not having a safe emotional place. Again, it just comes, I think, all down to being raised by people with unresolved trauma, who don't know how to properly communicate their feelings, or never speak about anything, or their parents never spoke about anything of actual substance. So then now when you have a child who is constantly questioning your teachings or your methods, or kind of you feel like they're questioning you and they're disrespecting you, and I'm putting air quotes here because I don't believe that's disrespect by having a truthful conversation. I think a lot of the times how I say things is perceived to people by being quote unquote disrespectful, but I just speak with a monotone tone, and I'm not raising my voice, I'm just speaking, and I'm asking questions. And I think being asked questions by an intelligent person who doesn't second guess themselves makes people second guess themselves, and then that continues the cycle of projection, and that is a projection of their ego now that you're fighting with. You're no longer fighting with the person in front of you or having a conversation with the person in front of you. You are in an argument all of a sudden by having a conversation because you are dealing with traumatized children in an adult form. And it's very hard to get people who are so stuck in their ways, so they think. But I just believe it's really just not wanting to adapt and change and confront the traumas that actually built you into the person you are, because then you would have to take a lot of accountability for the fact that you damaged another generation of people. And nobody wants to be the quote unquote bad guy, but a lot of people are the bad guy. And I think normally the people who are perceived as being mean, because they're honest, are results of projection. Hi, hello, my name's Anastasia. But seriously, like, I've been in so many conflicts with adults my entire life because I feel like I came into this world very sure of who I was and who I am. And I came in very confidently. And even when I wasn't confident, my confidence was only disintegrated by my family. You know, like, I was never. Kids are mean, sure, but they're mean because of their family. I genuinely think there are people who are born with bad spirits, sure, but I do think a lot of the times people who are not raised in actual loving homes, and when I say loving homes, I mean a house full of love, full of abundant love, full of unconditional love. People have not realized and really faced what love looks like, and a lot of people don't know what love is, and it is very difficult to raise children in a place that has never had love in it. Genuinely, like, I just am not sure how that even happens. I don't, like, it's really, that's something that doesn't click for me, is just having mass amounts of children in a world that does not know what love is. Stop having kids for fucking social media and fucking relationship issues and financial gains, and have a child because you want to bear a new person and you want to cultivate a space of love and abundant and unconditional love, and you want to show a person how to live in a world of that. To me, it sounds very easy, but I don't know what's going on, okay? But yeah. These are just the last two, but seeing toxic relationships and that being normalized within a child, I feel like it's pretty, if you're catching my drift, it kind of goes hand in hand. You aren't raised in a household full of love. Your parents, whether they are married, not married, together, not together, the house that you were in, you had no example of a healthy partnership. When you don't have a proper example of a healthy partnership, or someone who just loves themselves and had a child out of love because of those things, you as an adult will not know what love looks like. You will not know how to create proper healthy boundaries to establish a healthy and loving connection. You as an adult will face and have struggles and tribulations with trying to justify someone's toxic behaviors because that's what you know and what you're used to, and the normalization on social media and in spaces. You're going to constantly feel like you need to fight for your love and fight to be loved and try to convince people to love you because you didn't have a place at your core root foundation that established love. Domestic violence results of those things. Emotional abuse results because of those things. Seeing those patterns within your household so closely in a place that's supposed to protect you, normally those are, I feel like a lot of households have held the most danger. It's, for me, again, I'm going to use this outlandish kind of metaphor, but that's the same for church to me. Like, this is supposed to be a home of worship. And a lot of the times, these churches are built for financial gain or built from a narcissist who just wants to preach and build a cult-like following, or it's created because there's a disturbing person who has a power complex, who wants to build a place that people won't question what's going on behind the closed door. In a lot of those spaces where traumas are not properly addressed, they cultivate energy of just toxicity, of hate, of lies, of trauma bonding, of delusion. I've heard many, many stories from people who continue to worship whatever you choose to worship. That's not the point, but people who still continue to go to these spaces that have been attacked sexually in these spaces. And because you get attacked as a child, you tend to, if you don't have the will to address your issues within your core foundation of your life, you will continue to inhibit yourself, inhibit others. You will continue to affect others in your life negatively. You will continue to not lead a life of love. And you can't find love that you're looking for if that's the case. It's impossible. I don't believe it's not fair for a person who is healthy, moving through love, through light, through grace, who experience this lifestyle, to put up and try to work through the mud with a person who is still living in a delusional life and is still not ready to address the issues at hand, and is still not ready to humble themselves and have a little bit of ego death and humiliation, if you think that's what that is. Your truth shouldn't be humiliating. The trauma that happened to you shouldn't cause you to feel less about yourself. The trauma you inflict on others should. And it's rightfully so. I don't think that we should normalize trying to consistently I don't think that we should normalize consistently trying to bring up people who are not ready to face the reason they're so low. I think it's time we wake everyone up collectively. I think it's time that we directly address our core issues within our own foundation so that we can do the changes that we need to do for self, so that we can inhabit the lives that we want to exist in. I find it very hard to watch people in everyday life do shit so obliviously and move through life so carelessly. It's not making sense to me. The only thing that we know of this lifetime is literally that we will die one day. And as that being something that we can all agree will occur, at least on this physical plane, you should be willing to make any and all changes so that you can live a life of love, actually. Not a life of fake love, not a life of material love, not a life of social media love, not a life of praise, not a life of God complexes and narcissism, a life of love, abundant, pure love, moving through your heart space consistently throughout your life. Because when you do that, you attract people and you attract a life of love to you. And the only way we will be able to cultivate this society to move any more forward is by doing so. So this is why I say this. I'm wrapping up this entire thing. I'm wrapping up this entire podcast by saying this. As of now, if you have not checked the people in your life who directly affected you and the traumas that you have had, you need to. You need to hold people accountable for the actions that they inflicted on you, especially negatively. And you praise people in your life who have positively affected you. That's just what it is. You want to make a change, you want to live a life of love, you want to attract the partner you've been looking for, you want to be able to manifest your reality, do the work. Do the self-work. Be honest with yourself. Look yourself in the mirror and tell yourself the negative things that you do. Write it down. Write down all the negative traits you believe you have. And if you can't name one, you're not looking hard enough. And the only reason that I'm able to speak the way that I speak and look at myself the way that I look at myself, honestly, is because I've been looking at myself my entire life. I've been living this life alone, and I've looked at myself and I've done the fucking work. I've worked for the person that I am to be able to talk my shit and back that shit the fuck up tenfold, okay? People around me, and I'm saying people around me who see me, because there's people around me and there's people that will be in your life who won't be able to see you, and not everyone is meant to see you. But I'm going to tell you this, the people that see me know everything about me that I do, that I stand on, that I speak with, that I share my life with is valid. There is no one who can say things negatively about me and actually mean that shit. All my actions match up. And if my actions were not matching up, I was moving through a traumatized state. I was being triggered in that moment. And even in those moments, I do not negatively affect any other fucking person around me. I deal with my shit by myself. I do not sit here and project my reality onto others. My reality is love. That's my reality. So if I'm projecting onto you my reality, I'm projecting love into you. I am loving you because I choose to love you, because that is what my life is about. My life is about love. My life is not about people pleasing. My life is not about trying to get liked. My life is not about being around people falsely that I don't fucking like, that have negative fucking traits about themselves, and trying to push up on them for fucking social media shit. My life is genuine. I am living my life very intentionally. Everything I do in my life is intentional. I worked for this shit. I came here for a reason, okay? And I just want everyone to remember that they all came here for a reason. Everybody chose to be here. So if you chose to be here, do the work so that you cannot be here how you are again. You need to face your traumas, face the issues at hand, fuck the system, fuck the simulation, fuck the matrix, fuck all that shit. Deal with yourself, because you are a direct contributing factor. You are player one. So don't let people sit around. I hate when people try to tell people that it's not, their life is not about them. If you're moving through ego, of course you can try to humble somebody and be like, your life is whatever. Everybody's life is about them. And just as much as their life is about them, it's about the person in their life. If you meet another person, if you get blessed enough to be in someone's presence, whether negative or positive, you were in that situation to learn something. Because if they're negative and you continue to let them be in your life, that is a learning lesson for you to take, mobilize yourself, do more self-work, and check it. Check the reason why the negativity is coming. But also don't forget, as you become enlightened and positive and try to reach fulfillment for yourself, of course, negativity is going to come. But when you have and move through love, you'll be able to have more discernment. And I just hope you all have an amazing goddamn day. I hope you love yourself a little bit more today, tomorrow, whenever you hear this. And I hope that you do what you need to do to have the life you want to have, regardless of what that is. But be very careful about the things that you continue to do on this earth. Be very careful about your character that you show every time you do an action while you are on this goddamn planet. I wish you all a great day. I wish you all to move with more intention in your life and take life fucking seriously, because life is not a joke for everybody. It can be a joke for you. You can have fun, so you think, and not be fulfilled for the rest of your life if you choose to, but stop including people who care about themselves in your mission. Karma is a bitch. And that's that on that. Okay, love y'all. Have a great day. Podcast number 4 will come out when it comes out. And I love this episode. And au revoir.